So we're here today to talk about the doctoral thesis again, and now we're in section chapter 5, and this is the doctoral thesis Dr. Staso wrote, and it is Neural Foundations, What Stimulation Your Baby Needs to Become Smart. So there's so much that's happening in this 3 to 5 month age range. They're really starting to coordinate their senses. So they've been taking in sensory input, but now they're able to actually connect those dots in between their vision, and they're starting to understand that their hands belong to them. And they're not as reflexive in their behavior. So they're really starting to make choices about what they look at, what they're hearing, what they want to listen to, and how they can use their little hands. So vision. So vision at this age is still very much grounded in black and white, but they are craving novelty and they're craving more complexity. So things like patterns that you see, they're going to start to attend more to the patterns inside a design or an image. They're not just looking at the outer lines anymore. And so they'll notice, like, they'll start to look at more like the dots on the dog. You'll start to notice they're looking at the stripes, the little patterns and the details. So they're craving details because their eyes are getting better. They're getting better at looking, and they want practice. They're also really craving novelty. And so it's so important to think about really increasing kind of the rate that you're introducing new cards and new exposure to new visual stimulus to them. So we have a lot of extra cards with black and white images at Lovevery, or you can print some and download them, but just giving them this like steady diet of more increasingly complex images is really healthy for their visual development. You might notice that their binocular vision is starting to develop. So like around 3 to 4 months, they're starting to see in multiple dimensions. So they're looking at things like mobiles in a totally different way than they did when they were first born. So thinking about one of the things that you can do to give them dimension is to give them a mirror, and I'm not going to show you the mirror completely because you'll see where we are in my messy office. But looking at a mirror, a baby can see the dimension of their own face, even if they don't know that it's them that they're looking at, and they can start to see movement. So they love to look at dimension, 3 dimensions, and movement. So they're really entering this kind of new level of sophistication in their visual skills. And then I thought this was so interesting. So on page 80, they talk about by 4 months, babies are able to locate and track the source of a sound with considerable accuracy and quickness. This coordination between their eyes, ears, and neck muscles is a hallmark of this age and represents a new level of sophistication. So hearing is entering kind of a new dimension as well. So they're really they're able to listen to things that they want to listen to and tune out other noises. So they can still become overstimulated. So it's best to tune in when your baby seems to be getting too much input, but they're able to take in a lot more input than they were before. And then I thought this was so interesting. When I had my babies, I thought that, doing tummy time was sort of like their gross motor time, like, the time that like we go to the gym. But then looking at black and white images or talking to them was more of their cognitive brain time. And it's so interesting to understand development. It is so interlinked. So remember that the process of becoming more intelligent involves the ability to gain information readily and richly, not only from visual and auditory data, but from motor and sensory motor activities and feedback as well. That means that as they're using their bodies, there's this reciprocal relationship between the brain and their body. And so as they're doing tummy time, as they're figuring out how to lie on their side, or as they're stretching their muscles or swatting at things or practicing with their hands, they're actually stimulating brain growth in kind of multiple areas of the brain. So we have a whole video that covers gross motor activities with babies, about tummy time and rolling over and all these kind of questions that you have in that area that we'll cover. And so the thesis does cover swiping behavior, and they have some ideas for making like a DIY 2 tin pans and fill it with pasta and tape it up and somehow hang it and have your baby kick or swat at it. There's some other easier ideas that we found at home of like tissue paper kicking and batting. The play gym is great for batting with the batting bell, but you're really looking for ways for your child to understand this cause and effect with their body. So their arms batting at something and swiping at something does cause a reaction of another physical object in space. And then they start to understand that more deeply, that their body is connected to them and that they can actually enact an effect to their cause. So they also love to like use their muscles and like push their legs against something. I thought that this was really interesting on their baby's fine motor skills. So there's a section on fine motor, is that they're starting to really open and relax their fingers. And when they do that at this age, they're starting to really open up a whole new world of exploring different objects. And so some researchers, this is on page 84, says some researchers go far as to say that object manipulation with the hands is critical to intellectual development, and that the infant really does not know the properties of objects and cannot think about those objects until she has had the opportunity to fully explore with her fingers and her other body parts. So their development, again, is so interconnected. The sensory exposure that they get from all the stimulation that you're giving them really is getting integrated into their brain in deeper ways. So they talk about like using soft objects. So it's important to try and start with softer objects than harder objects. So the harder objects, sometimes at this age, if they don't actually have the ability to control when they're first consistently bringing their hand and able to start grasping something, they can't actually control the speed at which they're bringing that object to their body, and so they can accidentally bonk themselves. So we do suggest kind of holding off on the harder objects until a little bit later, or just being there with them when they're exploring the harder objects. And so the softer objects are great because they can start to practice, and they're opening up their fingers. At first, it will be kind of like a full grasp, and then they'll be able to slowly get more fingers involved and be more attentive about using their individual digits of their fingers to grasp and get something to their mouth, which is really their goal at this age. They want to explore everything with their little mouths. And so that's kind of like giving them things to play with and start to grasp and practice grasping is really important. The hand-to-hand transfer happens a little bit later, but this is really a fun object once they get a little bit more control to be able to mouth, and then eventually around month 5 or 6, they'll be able to move an object from hand to hand, which is even more advanced. The other thing that this was, I remember this being kind of like the main things to do with your baby when they're 3 to 5 months are to take them on house tours. So we talked about it a little bit before, but now their head is really held up most of the time. It's like bobbing only occasionally. So they have really good kind of neck and shoulder and head control at this age. And so putting them in a front-facing carrier and taking them around and helping them understand like the real world and real life cause and effect is so where it's at. So I remember doing this a lot with my babies. Turning on and off the water is fascinating for your baby. Turning on and off the lights, doing laundry together, doing kind of your regular cooking, like the things that you do throughout your day. Again, if you can just slow down a little bit and bring them along with you, it's incredible for their learning about the kind of really how the world works. Everything is so new to them. So we did a lot of house tours. And then on page 90, he has this demonstration of putting a cup and talking about support and cause and effect. I remember thinking about this and wanting to try it. I didn't try it, like tipping the cup over from like what supports what, but it's kind of an interesting experiment on physics, like how does the world work? I think that they're learning that so much from your house tours. So that is really kind of like the depth of their learning. They're learning about how the world works from being able to see what on and off looks like, whether it's water or lights or the laundry machine. When they get a little bit older, if their hands are open, you can actually, during those house tours, if they're not resistant to you, you can put your hand over their hand and have them turn on and off the light switch and or turn on the water faucet. So that's kind of fun. Language development. There's a section on language development, and I thought this was so eye-opening when I read this. When you ask your baby, thinking about how they're absorbing language, he says, "Are you hungry? Do you want something to eat?" When you say that in normal language, what they're hearing is all the words strung together. Are you hungry? Do you want something to eat? And so I think it's like slowing down just a little bit and doing what's natural. Drawing out those vowels and being able to speak naturally to your baby in that kind of like higher voice is so important, and research shows that it's actually really helpful for them to tune in to learning this new language that you're teaching them. So exaggerating with your voice is important. So in summary, we talk about like smaller, more elaborate, like specific designs, and just giving them the steady diet of really increasingly complex images, and a lot of variety. They're craving a ton of novelty right now because their eyes are really developing and they're starting to see in 3 dimensions. Thinking about their gross motor skills as being so important for their cognitive development. So it's all linked, and we have another video with a pediatric OT that talks about all the different kinds of ways you can play with your baby from a gross motor milestone perspective at this age. And then taking them on house tours and showing them the world, speaking to them while you're doing it naturally is where it's at for this 3 to 5 month age range.